class writing that has an amazing amount of insight, and I think that's the case. So I do recommend this one. He tells the story. He said it's an old story from China. Mr. Lai is a rural villager whose livelihood depends on his horse. One day his horse ran away, and all the neighbors took pity on him and said, "How unlucky are you? What misfortune?" Mr. Lai was not anxious. He replied, "We'll see. We'll see." A few days later, the horse returned and brought with it a number of wild horses. Mr. Lai and his family were suddenly very wealthy. And the people in the community said, "How lucky are you?" exclaimed the villagers. He said, "We'll see. We'll see." Do you have people in your life who always feel that they need to comment on your life? You know, I often want to say, would you keep your insight to yourself? But we do. We have people in our lives that want to comment on our lives. Then one day, his only son was training one of the wild horses, and he fell and broke his leg. And the villager said, "What misfortune?" declared his neighbors. He said, "We'll see, we'll see." A few weeks later, the Imperial Army came and passed through the village to draft all of the able-bodied young men in the military. But they did not take Mr. Lai's son because he was recovering from a broken leg. And the villagers said, "How lucky you are." He repeated to his neighbors, "We'll see, we'll see." Impermanence is what the Buddha is trying to teach, is just as capable of providing us with happiness as it provides us with suffering. It's not bad news to have impermanence, even though I don't like it either. There are many things I don't like. That still doesn't mean they aren't good for me. Anything we can change, anything can be changed and transformed because of impermanence. It has not come here to stay. It can always change. Now, you know, Thich Nhat Hanh is a Vietnamese monk, Buddhist monk, and a peace activist. There's literally activism in Buddhism that is essentially named by him, and it's called society or socially engaged Buddhism. Martin Luther King nominated him for the Nobel Peace Prize because of his anti-violent stance, and it was Thich Nhat Hanh that motivated Martin Luther King to speak out publicly against the Vietnam War. Such interrelationships from different belief structures, right? But he writes about the full awareness of breathing. It's a sutra. The full awareness of breathing. He says there are 3 doors of liberation. These practices that help liberate us from suffering. And there are wrong views that we have in life. And there are emptiness, singleness, and aimlessness. I never really thought about aimlessness, because if there is one thing I am focused. And I can get really focused. My parents and Tom both have said this about me. There's a look that comes in my eye, which means I am not going to let it go until it's resolved. So if I ever have that look at you, I am going to fix you, okay? There are 4 concentrations in impermanence, and that is non-craving, letting go, and nirvana. So we live in troubled times. There are always troubled times, right? And in the future, we will look back on these times and consider them the good old days. That's when life was simple. I cannot remember the number of times, particularly, you know, at work, where you say, "Oh, it's never been this bad." And now I look back at those times and think, those were the good old days. It's gotten, you know, it's bad now as well. So we'll always have them. But aimlessness is not about effort to escape life or to dwell in a place of bliss outside the world. Instead, it is the path that allows us to discover where we come from and where we are going. Most of all, it generates within us happiness, what I'm looking for, understanding and a love that we can live deeply at each moment in our lives, including the ones we don't like. Why? Because they are impermanent. This too soon will pass. Anything can change and transform into a more positive direction at any given time, thanks to impermanence. We call it change your thinking and change your life. And aiming is this endless task often of being inauthentic. How do you cover up who and what you really are? But because of impermanence, we can practice aimlessness, that everything in life does not have to be an aim, and what he calls resting in God. Not wandering or being disengaged. It's about resting in the Spirit, being comfortable and at rest. He writes, why can you rest? Because you're already what you want to become. You have been all the time. So we should be authentic. Why? Because he writes, you are a marvel, you are a wonder. You already are what you want to become. You can rest in your authenticity. Aimlessness is resting in God or in resting in who and what we are. He writes, just as a wave doesn't look for the water, we don't need to look for the ultimate because we are one with the ultimate. The wave is the water, and we also share in the ultimate. Emma Curtis Hopkins put it this way, and we often quote her by saying, what you seek is also seeking us. It's your good. You already are what you want to become as long as you acknowledge it. He writes, you are made of the sun, the moon, and the stars. You have everything inside you. Don't cover it up being inauthentic. He writes about Christianity. He says, there is a phrase called resting in God. When you let go of all your seeking and the ability and your striving to hide, it is when you are resting in God, or in his tradition, nirvana. We establish ourselves in the present moment rather than delaying our happiness to the future. And I have to admit, this is something I always have to learn. I am always planning, and living in the exact minute is not very easy for me. It's something I always have to work at. We dwell in the ultimate at all times, though, at now and in the future. And dwelling is in the ultimate it doesn't require faith or belief. It just is. It's just true for us. The wave doesn't need to look for the water, and we don't have to look for the ultimate any other place other than within ourselves. He writes, God is not outside of us, and we would say it's not outside of reality at all. It is reality, and we call it separation, and that there is no separation. God is inside and outside. We are in God. He's not talking about physical rest from any activity, that if you just get enough rest, you can go back to it again, or you can take a breath when you get to the landing before you go up the next level of stairs. That's not what he's talking about. He's talking about how to become comfortable with our identity. And we keep moving with what we have until we discover all of the goodness that is within us. The one thing we can be confident of is that God will not lose us while we're wandering. He writes, concentrating on aimlessness means arriving in the present moment to discover that the present moment is the only moment in which you can find everything that you are looking for in the present moment. Aimlessness does not mean doing nothing, though. It means not putting something in front of you to chase after in the endless hiding we can do, that how we protect ourselves by being inauthentic. We can't remove all the obstacles in our lives, and we cannot wait to be happy by removing all of the obstacles and the objects that stand in our way to get all of what we desire and crave. It is also in the moment, and I have to remind myself that happiness is in the moment, not when I achieve the next thing. It'll be good then too, but that'll be the very moment at that time. We must be present, though, in the current time. We rest in the Spirit, and the spiritual rest gives us the ability to escape the confusion, the worry, the stress, and the useless amount of human effort that can go toward the things we do in life that may be beneficial for us, but sometimes you just, no matter how hard you work, You're like that ever-ready bunny. You just run out of power. Rest means to be at peace, to be calm, and I would say to be authentic. One must dwell in the presence of the divine and look for that awareness by just resting in God. It's all good and it all will be fine. Dwelling, though, is being aware that we are always in God's presence. Even when we don't feel it, we are always in God's presence. We can always trust the divine. He writes, "You are enough." And he writes about a Chinese Zen master, Lin Chi, who said that humans and Buddhas are not two. He said they are the same. There is no difference between you and the Buddha. He was saying that you are already enough being exactly and who and what you are. You don't need to be, he continues, you don't need to do anything special to become a Buddha as long as you are being authentic. I think this is why we become so exhausted, is that we spend so much time trying to protect ourselves by being inauthentic. Nothing is more exhausting in my book than trying to be something that you're not. And often what my experience was is people were talking about people like me and I was there, right? I mean, they're happening and I'm trying to, hopefully they don't notice, right? But our true self doesn't need money or fame or status. Our true self doesn't need anything because we are already enough. We just need to live our lives deeply in every given moment and understand whether the moment is unpleasant or pleasant. It will change at some point. Doing all things with a wonder, living life with wonder, and the art of living is doing it with personal freedom, understanding that you can be who and what you are. And we must train ourselves to walk as a free person, to sit as a free person, to eat as a free person. Only the present moment is real. Only the present moment. The ideas about the futures are dreams. They're not real at the present moment. He tells the story, he's from the Bible. He says there's a farmer who discovers treasure hidden in a field, and he sells everything that he has to buy the field. The treasure, though, is already in the field. He just has to become aware of it. You only need one moment of awakening to realize that what you are looking for is already within you. And very much like the farmer, as soon as we discover this, we can easily let go of everything and enjoy the peace and the happiness and the serenity that we can have in every moment in life if we learn how to turn within. He writes, to lose the present moment is to lose our only chance to encounter life. For some of us, our deepest dream is to go to heaven. And if you are a Buddhist, to the Pure Land after you die. We believe that life is insufficient and unsatisfactory, and that we touch only the deepest parts and fulfilling level of our lives of existence in the future. But if you wait until you die to expect happiness, he writes, you are too late. He says, our human body allows us to touch all of the wonders of life now, including the ultimate itself, the right here and right now. Don't put it off. The practice of aimlessness is to identify what you are looking for and waiting for and running after and let it go. It will happen, but sometimes we have to let it go. By removing these objects that we are seeking and pulling away to the here and now, you can discover that everything that you want is already right in the present moment. You don't need to be someone or something or achieve something else to be happy and free. He writes that a student once asked him, what does it mean to surrender to God and to God's will? And he replied, I see God's will is that we just be our best and that we try to help others be their best. This is the will of God. And we tend to think that by all kinds of means possible and by this path takes us to a point of success. rather than understanding the success has to be in the journey, or you will waste your entire life in the journey for something that may happen yet in the future. But in the spirit of Buddhism, as soon as you have a dream or an intention or an idea, he writes, you must live it. Your dream can be realized right in the present moment. You live your life in such a way that every step is in the right direction and every breath that you take is moving you closer to just being who and what you are. He writes, your dream does not take you away from the present. To the contrary, your dream becomes the reality in the present moment. And impermanence is something, it's incredible. It's so great that we have this gift. If things were not impermanent, then what you want wouldn't be possible. A seed would never become a plant. A child would never become an adult. We could never expect our healing and our transformation if there wasn't for impermanence. We would never be able to realize our dreams if there wasn't impermanence. So it's important to us. It is a gift. And I often quote, and he makes this link that I had never made before, that with God, all things are possible. It's very common that I say that. And he makes this connection about that. He says, thanks to impermanence, everything is possible. Because of impermanence, everything is possible. The truth is that suffering and happiness just are, and they always exist with each other. And overcoming difficult moments in our relationships can deepen our love. The good news is that suffering and happiness are both impermanent. So this too will pass. Our way out of whatever circumstances we are in is in. So I return to my original question. Are you resting in the divine? Do you rest in God when you are not resting in God when you are confused and worried and stressed? You can't pay attention to yourself. When we are not at peace, we just make ourselves miserable. But dwelling and being aware of our presence within the Spirit gives us comfort and lets us know that impermanence is a gift. Things will change. We can rest in God. Why? Because you're already enough. You can rest in God because of living in the present moment. The only reality that we have is really right now. There's some form of denial about putting it off into the future. You can rest in God because everything you need and all the happiness that you need is just the hidden treasure within you of authenticity, the divine within. And so it is.